welcome back to another AnyRPG Development Livestream. In these videos, I livestream the development of the AnyRPG Engine, a free and open source role-playing game engine designed in Unity and written in C#. If you don't already have a copy of AnyRPG, you can pick one up from anyrpg.org/downloads in both Unity package and source code format. You can also find free copies of the games that I work on available for download at the same page. In this episode, I'll be adding the ability, hopefully, to get cutscenes that are in the middle of a level rather than cutscenes that are only at the beginning of a zone, and also explaining basically how I fixed the issue that was happening in the last video. So, in the last video, there was an issue where when we were playing pressing the switch, spawning the level, then not all the blocks were spawning. So that was fixed when I found an issue or why it was happening, basically. And what happens is when you subscribe to an event, if there's an error in the stack anywhere on anything that's subscribed, none of the other subscribers will get the message after that error. And what was happening here is that event was actually being sent as part of this onDirtyUpdate method in the UMA class, and it was catching the exception that was happening and then printing out a log warning instead. And so what you saw then, or what you'd see then, is basically because I don't have the warning thing here highlighted, I never actually saw the warning, and there was just a null reference somewhere in there. So I fixed that, and I'll just demonstrate where we are and show what we're going to be doing in this episode. So we'll load up the Lost Game Manager here, the Load Game Manager here. And we'll press play and load up the level, and you'll see now I'm able to actually move the blocks, both of them, with press of the switch. So let's load up my guy that's in here, the Temple of Ancient Energy. And he's at the beginning of the level right now, and you can see that this switch is now basically interactable or clickable. So when we run over and we get to the other room in here, we'll see that now there's a gap and there's no way across, and that other bridge leading to the end is up, but we can't get to it. It's way too far away. So we're going to head back to the beginning of the level here, and when we press the switch, we will have both of the platforms move there. I think I have to lower it because I found that I actually have to jump to get to it, but it worked, and you can see now we have a block up there so that we can run across this big gap in the floor, and now the other bridge is down. So if we run over here and we click this switch, you can see they trade places. That other one is moved down, and now this final bridge is up, and then now we can get down the hallway and continue on in the dungeon. So the problem with that, of course, was when we clicked the switch, we didn't really know that anything happened. So how I want to deal with that is I want to have a cutscene, basically, that as soon as I click the switch, it'll actually pop the camera into this room and then watch these bridges raise and lower so that you know, basically, that something actually happened. So to do that, we're going to have to make some modifications to the current cutscene functionality. Right now, I'm just using scene nodes as basically a shortcut to make cutscenes. So if you see this Birch Grove cutscene here, we actually have a checkbox saying is cutscene, and then allow cutscene nameplates, and then cutscene viewed. So what we want to do is we actually want to make a new scriptable object called cutscene. And instead of basically having this cutscene attached to a scene node, we'll be able to play multiple cutscenes in the middle of any scene from now on after we do that. So let's go ahead and make a new cutscene scriptable object. So to do that, we'll just close up all these folders here and then go down into the engine, into the scripts, and this will be another type of scriptable object, so that means we'll have to make a resource profile for it. So we can pretty much just duplicate any old resource profile. I'll just do weapon skill here, and I will call this one cut scene. Actually, cut scene like that. Okay. So now we're going to open up the cutscene, and this is going to be new cutscene, and the menu name is AnyRPG Cutscene. The class will be cutscene, and then what we're going to do is go into the scene node class basically, and I'm just going to close a bunch of stuff here. We'll go into the scene node class, and then we will basically copy everything that's in the scene node properties that relates to cutscenes into the cutscenes. So we have basically is cutscene, and this one we still need a way to say that there's a cutscene that should autoplay when we basically load the level. So what I want to do is a serialized field, and we'll make it a private string autoplay cutscene name. And essentially, if this string is not empty, then it'll just autoplay a cutscene as soon as the level is loaded. So then we'll want to move these components out, but actually first thing we want to do is, because this is a resource, we can initialize this to an actual cutscene. So to do that, we'll just make a private cutscene auto play cutscene, and it'll be null by default, and then we'll initialize that in the setup scriptable objects. But first we actually have to make a scriptable object manager for the cutscene class. So let's go do that. So under our resource managers, we can basically just load up any resource manager here. So I'll go Control D to duplicate that one, and we will call this the System Cutscene Manager. We'll open up the System Cutscene Manager, unfold the singleton, and change the name here to System Cutscene Manager. Copy that, replace all three instances of that in the singleton, then change weapon skill to cutscene, copy that, and replace all instances of weapon skill inside of this file with cutscene. Alright, so now our cutscene describable resource will, our scene node will basically need to initialize the cutscene. So we have this set up scriptable objects method at the bottom, which is where we initialize references to all other scriptable objects. So what I'll do here is just set if autoplay cutscene name does not equal null and autoplay cutscene name does not equal string.empty, then we want to have a cutscene tmp cutscene equals system cutscene manager.myInstance.getResource based on the autoplay cutscene name. If the temp cutscene is not null, then our autoplay cutscene equals temp cutscene, and otherwise we want to log an error letting us know that we couldn't find the cutscene autoplay cutscene name. Alright, that's good, and now our scene nodes can refer to cutscenes. So now we need to attach the system cutscene manager to the game manager. So we will open up the game manager, and under our resource managers we will add the component, the system cutscene manager. Alright, so now we have a way to access the singleton while we're playing, and we can load those cutscenes. So now we need to actually give the cutscenes the correct properties. So these three are the right ones. We will copy those, and actually we don't even need the Boolean one, and we'll paste them into the cutscene class. And let's see. We'll save that, and then this one we'll want to copy out of there too. And then it's time to start making some cutscenes. So let's test this out. So I will go to a Lost Soul resources, and these I think can pretty much, you know what? No, they won't be shared resources. They'll be per game. So I'll make a new folder here called Cutscene, and then make a new AnyRPG Cutscene. This one will be the Birch Grove cutscene. And let's go and take a look at the Birch Grove cutscene scene node. So in the Birch Grove cutscene scene node, we are allowing cutscene nameplates, and that's the only thing that's checked. We'll set the autoplay cutscene name here to Birch Grove. And we'll make sure that is allow cutscene nameplates is checked on the cutscene. Okay, so that's good. So now we can go back into the Birch Grove cutscene scene node. Right, actually, we want to go find the next cutscene. So the next cutscene that we have is the History of Magic cutscene. So we will go make a cutscene called History of Magic. So I'll just Control D to duplicate that and call it History of Magic. We'll go to the scene node and look at the History of Magic cutscene, and it only has as well allow cutscene nameplates. So we'll want to make sure that it is loading the History of Magic Autoplay Cutscene, and then make sure that that cutscene has allow cutscene nameplates checked, and it does. Crystal Mine also has a cutscene associated with it, and let's see, the way that the Crystal Mine one is working is it doesn't have is cutscene checked. So the property is cutscene, what it basically does is loads the previous level that you were in at the end of this level. So we will have this one autoplay the cutscene, and the cutscene will be called Crystal Mine, and Crystal Mine doesn't have any nameplates allowed or any of the other options checked. So we'll set that to Crystal Mine, and the resource name will be Crystal Mine, and we won't have anything else checked there. I'm going to check this box, is cutscene here. We're going to change the name of this because basically this property tells us whether or not we should be unloading the current level that we're in after this one is over. So I think we need a better name for that, like unload scene on end or something like that. I'll come up with a better name here in a minute. For now, let's make the rest of the cutscenes. So we've got the Mana Seal cutscene and the War of the Magi cutscene. So the Mana Seal allows cutscene nameplates, and that's the only thing it has. And the War of the Magi allows cutscene nameplates and use default faction colors. The other thing we'll want to do actually is the dialogue name is actually also a cutscene only property, so we'll want to move that into the cutscene as well. Okay, and so we will make the Mana Seal. And then the War of the Magi. And this one allows use default faction colors on it. So let's see, I think unload scene on finish should be a good name for whether or not this cutscene should be unloaded or not. We'll move dialogue name and dialogue into there, and let's see, we'll want to initialize the dialogue nodes. So we'll just copy this entire setup scriptable objects method here, add it there, and then pull out everything except for the dialogue initialization. And then we'll go back to the scene node class and remove the dialogue initialization, because that's now part of the cutscene. Okay, that's good. And there's one more cutscene that I forgot about, and that is the Soulforge cutscene. There's a little like intro cutscene when you zoom in on the Soulforge. So we'll call this one Soulforge. Set the title up there to Soulforge. And if we look at the scene node for the Soulforge, it has suppress main camera right there. The Soulforge basically has a description, and we'll just keep that description there for now. It'll have Autoplay Cutscene name and just Soulforge. I want to see if there's anywhere else where I'm suppressing the main camera that's not a cutscene. So the Birch Grove cutscene, the Crystal Mine cutscene, the History of Magic cutscene, the Mana Seal cutscene, the Soulforge cutscene, the War of the Magi cutscene. Okay, good. So what I can do then basically is just remove this whole suppress main camera checkbox. It's not really needed anymore. We'll want to give the War of the Magi dialogue name to the War of the Magi cutscene. The Soulforge doesn't have a specific one. The Mana Seal has a dialogue, I believe, called the Mana Seal cutscene, like that. And History of Magic, I think, has one as well. Crystal Mine does not, and Birch Grove does not. Okay, so good. So now that we have basically copied over all the properties, we can just start removing these properties from the scene node. So our scene nodes no longer need dialogues. here. Okay, so we'll have to basically fix this code here. So we have this getActive scene node, and if the my suppress main camera equals true or my is cutscene equals true, then we're going to suppress the main camera. I think we want to do that logic a little bit differently. So let's see. We don't need to check for suppress main camera anymore because that property is going to be going away and will be replaced with the autoplay cutscene. So here we'll basically be checking if getActiveSceneNode dot, and then we need to expose the property. So we'll do quick actions and refactorings, encapsulate field, autoplay cutscene, change the name to my autoplay cutscene, go back to the level manager, and basically my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. And if that's the case, whoops, then that means we've actually got a cutscene. Okay, so if my is cutscene equals false and getActiveSceneNode.myCutscene viewed, so this logic can actually be completely changed up. Because we removed that one condition from the top, we actually don't even need to bother checking for this right here. So essentially, we want to do that and then .my. Alright, so we need to expose the viewed property. So we'll just put viewed. And it'll be false by default, and then we'll expose that. And we might as well just go ahead and expose that while we're at it, and expose that as well. We'll save that and head back over to the level manager, and then in this case we'll be checking if viewed equals true. If this cutscene basically has already been viewed, then we're just going to set the main camera active. Otherwise, we will not set it active, and we will set the cutscene camera controller to active. So here, we don't need to perform this check because once again, we already performed that outside here. getActiveSceneNode.my Autoplay Cutscene does not equal null. And we don't have mySuppressMainCamera as a property anymore, so basically I'm pretty sure that we can just safely start the cutscene at this point. And in this case we're passing in a dialogue. I think what we'll do is we'll actually just pass in the entire cutscene because it's now a scriptable object. So we can pretty much do that. And then we'll want to go to the definition of that function and make it accept a cutscene instead. So this will accept cutscene. And the dialogue will be the cutscene.myDialogue. Okay, that's good. Let's save that and go back into Unity, and this error will hopefully go away. Alright, so next up we can remove use default faction colors. So we'll go to the scene node and remove use default faction colors and remove the property for it as well. Go back into Unity and see if we got any errors because of that. We have a few, so we'll just need to change the code to refer to the correct thing. So here we're grabbing the active scene node. So instead, what we need to do is grab the active scene node's property. So active scene node.my autoplay cutscene does not equal null, and active scene node.my autoplay cutscene.my use default faction colors. Okay, that'll fix that issue. And here we want to do the exact same thing. So active scene node.my autoplay cutscene does not equal null, and active scene node dot my autoplay cutscene dot my use default faction colors equals true. Okay, good. That got rid of those issues. Next, we want to go to the scene node class and remove the cutscene viewed property from it. So we'll get rid of that. Get rid of the public property for it. And then go fix all the issues with whatever was referring to it. So in this case, we already have a reference to the current cutscene. And in fact, what we should do is actually make a little bit more of a permanent reference. So here we have current dialogue. So I'm going to make a private cutscene, current cutscene. Here we'll set the current cutscene equal to the new cutscene. And then here we can just set the current cutscene dot my viewed equals true. And this is where basically we need to make a change in the logic. So right here, what we want, and I'll just make a comment to remind us what we're going to do here basically, is if this is not a cutscene that should return, then do not else do. So at this point, the logic is going to be basically if current cutscene dot, and this is where we want to have that property. So the property is going to be called, let's see, unload scene on end. At the end of this cutscene, should we load the previous scene? And by default it can be false. And by default that one can be false too. And by default that can be string.empty. And then we'll want to expose this. Alright, that looks good. So then here, if current cutscene dot my unload cutscene on end, then return from cutscene. Actually, you know what? Honestly, I think this logic is going to go inside there because I think we actually already take care of a little bit of this logic in there. Let's actually just confirm that because we have different types of cutscenes and they don't all unload. So yeah, okay. So what we want to do here, I think we want to actually pass in the cutscene. And I think I actually want to change the name of this. Let's just find all references to it and see how many places it's called. Basically just there. Okay. So I think we're actually going to call this end cutscene. I kind of like that a little bit better. So rename end cutscene and apply. Yeah, okay. And then so here we don't want to get active scene node. we'll accept the cutscene. So we will end the cutscene, current cutscene. And here we just have to accept a cutscene. And then here we can check if the cutscene dot myOnLoadScene on end equals true, then load level return scene name. Otherwise, we're going to do all this stuff here. Let's just go to spawn player unit. So we should do an if then check. So if the player manager dot my instance dot my player unit spawned equals false, then we're going to spawn the player unit. Otherwise, we don't need to, because this must have been a cutscene that was just happening like in the middle of a level. Okay. So now we basically let's see, now we basically just need to call start cutscene. And this should all pretty much work automatically. The one thing is we're loading, actually we're loading the cutscene camera. Okay, so let me just see again how we're doing that exactly. AnyRPG cutscene camera controller is what we're looking for. And it's a singleton. So let's just go take a look at a cutscene, because I can't remember how I set this up. You know what? Let's fix these errors first. Okay. So in our system scene node manager, when we load the scene node, we don't need to do this anymore. But what we will need to do is we'll need to do that to the cutscenes, basically. So I'll want to take this code right here and put it inside of the system cutscene manager. And then this will have to be cutscene save data, which we haven't defined yet. So let's go to the definition of scene node save data. We'll copy that and we'll make cutscene save data. fine. Cutscene name is cutscene viewed. We don't need persistent objects. So then we want to find all references to scene node save data. And basically anywhere we do this, we will want to save cutscene data as well. So instead of scene node, that'll say save cut scene data. And for each cutscene in system cutscene manager myInstance.getResourceList cutscene save data cutscene save data equals new cutscene save data. Name and is viewed as needed. Persistent objects is not. This should say cutscene.myname, and this should say cutscene.myCutsceneViewed, and in this case it's actually my viewed. And we're going to add to the cutscene save data cutscene save data. Okay, then here we've got load scene node, and this should actually say load cutscene, and we should be accepting cutscene save data. And we should be looking for a cutscene. And we don't need to load persistent data. And here we should be grabbing cutscene.myViewed equals cutscene save data dot is cutscene viewed. Next place that we use this is scene node save data right there. So we'll need to make a list of cutscene save data. And call it cutscene save data. Then we have load scene node in the system scene node manager, so we don't need to worry about that. Then we'll want to duplicate this block of code here. AnyRPG save data dot cutscene save data equals null or overwrite. Then AnyRPG save data dot cutscene save data equals new list of cutscene save data. This doesn't need to be done because that's no longer part of the scene nodes. And we have that function down there, so that looks good. this code move down a little bit. Right, good. So then we want to take basically this load scene node data call and do load cutscene data. And we're going to do for each cutscene save data, cutscene save data in AnyRPG save data dot cutscene save data. The system cutscene manager dot my instance should load the cutscene, and that will be the cutscene save data that we're handing to it. Now let's just find all references to that, and right here we have load scene node data, and we'll do the exact same thing. We will load cutscene data. Okay, good. So Control Shift S to save everything. Let's go back in and see if we have any more issues. One more here. And let's see. On level load, we're basically checking if the active scene node is a cutscene, or we suppress character spawn and cutscene basically hasn't been viewed. Okay, so this check right here was put in to allow the kind of thing we had at the beginning of like Crystal Mine or Soulforge, where we had like an intro cutscene, but that's no longer needed because even intro cutscenes should be okay. So basically, if active scene node dot my autoplay cutscene does not equal null, and active scene node dot my autoplay cutscene dot my viewed is false. So basically, if the scene node has an autoplaying cutscene and it has not yet been viewed, then we want to disable the main camera and not load the character. Okay, let's save that. And I have an extra bracket here. Alright, good. So that's starting to compile. Okay, so now we can remove from the scene node allow cutscene nameplates. And just let that compile. And now we can remove is cutscene. remove the public property for it and save that. And here, we just want to replace this with my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. And dot my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. And down here, same thing. Dot my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. And right here as well, dot my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. Okay. Let's go back, look at our messages, and see if there's anything else here. Okay, great. So now our scene nodes basically have everything removed that they need to, pretty much. I think I'm going to keep suppress main camera and suppress character spawn in there. They're no longer really necessary as part of the cutscene, but there may be like other reasons besides a cutscene that we want to do those things potentially. So we've got our cutscenes. All right. So the War of the Magi is an unload cutscene on end. The Soul Forge is not. The Mana Seal is. The History of Magic is. The Crystal Mine is not. And the Birch Grove cutscene is. So basically Crystal Mine, no. Soul Forge, no. Okay, perfect. Now we should have everything that we need in order for cutscenes to actually work properly as their own individual scriptable objects. So I think it's a good time to just test that. Let's make sure that everything we did so far is okay, and then we're going to connect this cutscene, do a timeline controller, or something like that. Alright, so we can see there's basically an immediate bug, and that is that basically our player spawned. So I think that's actually because we stopped referring to the player spawn. In the level manager here, or the suppress player spawn. So let's see. If it is a cutscene, or we're suppressing the character spawn and not my cutscene viewed, was the old logic. And actually, that makes sense why that worked, because even if something wasn't a cutscene, then that box would always be basically null by default. So what we need to do here is just change this. We're going to copy that, and then we're just going to hit Control Y to replay all of those changes. And basically, if it's an autoplay cutscene and the cutscene has been viewed equals false, or suppress character spawn is true, then we will set load character to false. Okay, let's go back into Unity. Hopefully that'll fix that issue. So that's definitely a perfect example of when we want the suppress character spawn when something's not a cutscene. Okay, so that's a lot better. We don't have a character spawning now. So now we're going to load up our game, and I want to go to my tester over at the Sun Temple, because he's in a spot where he can view a bunch of cutscenes.
In the beginning, there was no magic. Man could not project his will outside his body. In a time before history, people discovered that they could channel their will to control the environment around them. This channeling came to be known as magic. The users of magic were called magi. But there was a side effect. You can read about it in this book right here.
Alright, so now we're going to try playing this cutscene.
Man worked and toiled all day. Work, work, work. Magic made life easier.
Alright, so I see an issue here.
But it also caused the life force of the caster to leak out into the environment.
I think there might be another error in the way that I reformatted some of that stuff here. This set faction color, I think this logic is wrong. Let's just rewind the history on this particular change. Okay, just a second. Control Z, Control Y. Control Z, Control Y, Control Y, Control Z. Okay, good. So that pretty much brings us almost exactly back to where we were. So if the player unit spawn equals false, and the active scene node does not equal null, and the active scene node.my is cutscene, then we're going to return. let's rewind a little bit more. And back up a little bit more. Because I feel like the faction shouldn't have been showed, or basically like the character name never actually got showed properly. So I'm just going to back up basically everything we did here on the nameplate controller and then just go and look at these again. So here, my use default faction colors would basically always be false unless we were playing a cutscene. So basically, active scene node my autoplay cutscene does not equal null, and my default faction colors equals true. All right, so that one I think was fine. If the player unit is not spawned and the active scene node does not equal null, and this is not a cutscene. Oh, actually, just a second. Which one are we doing right now? We're doing this one. Okay. So this is actually exactly the same. If active scene node does not equal null and my use default faction colors is true, so we can basically replay that. Active scene node.my autoplay cutscene does not equal null, and active scene node.my autoplay cutscene.my use default faction colors. Okay. So I think the problem is actually, yeah, down here. Okay, so let's see. In the nameplate controller here, if the nameplate unit does not equal null, let me just check and make sure that the history of magic cutscene, or I mean that the history of magic scene node actually properly references the history of magic cutscene. Okay, it does, so that's good. So if the player unit object does not equal null, which means the player's around, or this is a cutscene, then render the nameplate. Okay, so yeah, get active scene node dot my autoplay cutscene does not equal null. So that condition looks fine. This condition is also fine. And that condition is also fine. Okay. If the player unit spawned equals false, and the active scene node does not equal null, and this is not a cutscene, then we're going to return. So let's just Control Y to replay that. So we want actually that condition. So I think I just had that condition reversed. Okay, let's try that. Let's load the game again. Go into the Sun Temple.
In the beginning, there was no magic. Man could not project his will outside his body. In a time before history, people discovered that they could channel their will to control the environment around them. This channeling came to be known as magic. The users of magic were called magi. But there was a side effect. You can read about it in this book right here.
Alright, so we're going to accept this quest. I'm actually just going to save the game right here. And we're going to load the History of Magic cutscene again. There we go, that's better. Okay, cool, yeah, awesome.
Man
so I just
worked and toiled all
had
day.
like that one condition wrong.
Work.
Okay, good, so
Magic
we'll watch the
made
cutscene and we'll
life
just make sure
easier.
that it returns to the level afterwards.
But it also caused the life force of the caster to leak out into the environment. What's this? What is happening? Where it could grant sentience to anything it touched.
Okay,
Around the time that people
I
discovered
am
magic,
good with that.
there was a tribe of ancient
it
sun
looks like
worshippers called
basically
the Sun
that
Dancers.
type of cutscene is working. So the next type of cutscene that we want to try out is basically the intro cutscene, and we can make one of those happen really quickly just by loading the game. Making a new game, sorry. So we're just going to start a new game. And if everything everything works, we should get a cutscene. Ooh, okay. So, we apparently do not have a current dialogue set. And let's see here. Basically, this is because I implemented dialogues on cutscenes and then pretty much never went back to any of the cutscenes that didn't have dialogues to fix them. So let's see, I think basically the way to deal with that, because we're no longer capable of playing anything that doesn't have a dialogue, we can go add dialogues for those cutscenes, but I actually want to protect against the instance where there is no valid dialogue for the cutscene. So for now, we're just going to basically just add like a check in there. So let's see, if the current dialogue is null, then we're just going to return because there's nothing to do here. Do we have errors now? Ah. Okay, we're not. We're going to totally change the way we do that. If the current dialogue is not null, then we're going to do all this stuff right here. Alright, let's try that. So let's press play and start a new game. Right, so new game. And let's see. Okay. That's not bad. And we've got another issue here. Okay, so let's see where this one is happening. This is happening on initialize local components for a nameplate controller under the spawn nameplate method. And basically, we don't have a faction at the beginning of the game. So essentially what's happening here is it's seeing that we had an autoplayed cutscene and attempting to do that instead. And this logic isn't exactly correct. Just a second, let's see exactly what line it bugged out on. It actually did that, and that's because my use default faction colors was apparently set to true for the Soulforge. Which it shouldn't really be. Let's just go take a look at that. Yeah, it shouldn't. The only one that should be using default faction colors is the War of the Magi. I think that was just basically a bad copy. However, we should not be letting a bad checkbox cause this type of issue, because that's really going to confuse the user. So what we actually want to do basically is check if we are in a cutscene, essentially. So the closest thing that we have to a check for whether we're actually currently playing a cutscene right now is this cutscene bar controller and our current cutscene property. So let's set current cutscene to null after we're done the cutscene. And then let's just expose that property. And essentially, that'll just tell us if a cutscene is playing. And I think that's totally the way to go. So basically, we don't have to check this anymore. All we need to check is, how do we get to our cutscene bar controller? If I find all references to this, it's in the UI manager. Okay. So we can refer to this by basically UI manager.myInstance.my cutscene bar controller dot my current cutscene does not equal null. Okay, and that's a lot better. That's basically asking, are we actually in a cutscene right now? Which is basically, it's a lot closer to the check that we actually want to do. So then here, we don't have to check active scene node anymore. We can now just query our cutscene bar controller directly for the current cutscenes. My use default faction colors is true property. I like that a lot better. Here, I think we pretty much want to do the exact same thing. So essentially, if we are in the middle of a cutscene, this code right here. Oh wait, you know what? But actually, no, that check is fine because essentially my autoplay cutscene equals null. We only want to return if we're not in the middle of a cutscene. Actually, I think that'll be fine. Basically, we just want to say if my current cutscene equals null, that would essentially be the same thing. And this check right here, let's actually just see how many other references we have to my autoplay cutscene in here. I think it was just those few. So I think this is basically the same thing we want. This should only ever happen when you're actively in a cutscene. And then we can just query the current cutscenes, use default colors. And I think we need a safety check in here. So basically, if nameplate unit.myFaction does not equal null, then we can do that. Otherwise, we actually just want to do the same thing we're doing down below. Like that. Because this is where we don't want a null faction to cause that null reference. Okay. I think that'll be okay, and then we've got a couple more places where we're referring to the current cutscene. So this get active scene node call, I think these are the only other places it is, just these 3 or 4 instances down there. Do we actually use the active scene node? We don't actually need it anymore, because we can just basically check if we're in a cutscene, and essentially that eliminates us the need to even grab the active scene node. And here we will want to perform the same check again. So if nameplate unit dot my faction does not equal null, else we also just want to do the same thing that we did below, which is my health slider dot color equals faction dot get faction color based on nameplate unit. And that's basically a factionless safe call, because this is like a static thing. So now we just want to fix up the last few references to get active scene node. So right here, this is pretty much the same thing. We just want to make sure that we're in a cutscene. And if we're in a cutscene, then we're basically basing this rendered distance on the distance to the cutscene camera rather than the distance to the player. So that's fine. And here, same thing. Our current camera is going to be the cutscene camera controller if we are currently in a cutscene. Otherwise, it's the camera manager main camera. And finally, right here, we also only want to register this condition if we are currently in a cutscene. Okay, I think that logic will work a lot better. Hopefully. And then this little bit right here, I'm not sure about that. Let's just try loading the game and playing it again. And I want to see if that error recurs now that we've fixed up the other null reference from this stuff right here. Because basically, like, we may have just, like, our stack may have blown up and we may not have got to something that made everything spawn properly. So we'll go create a new game. Alright, there we go, cool, that's all. Alright, that was almost better. Right up until the point where we got this right here. Interesting. So it's almost like at the point where we get this valid option count, we don't have a reference to the character. So let's just look at that stack here. Interactable woke up, spawnable woke up. They created their event subscriptions. The player unit had already spawned, so they're handling their prerequisite updates and instantiating the minimap indicator. The minimap indicator wants to know how many valid interactables there are so that it can get a valid option count. So this seems to me like an ordering issue. And I think it happened as soon as like, because this comes from a unit spawn node, so I think we tried to spawn an AI soul. And I think when we tried to spawn the AI soul, the interactable's awake method ran before the character unit's awake method. So if we look at the character unit here, basically this base character property, it gets set somewhere down here. Actually, what probably more than likely happened is we actually had a reference to base character, because we get that in get component references. Which is called from orchestrate startup. Which is called from AI character. Which is called in the awake method. And I bet that if we were to stick a debug right here in the awake method, we would see this being called after the interactable's awake method. I just want to confirm that, so I'm going to just save that. And then let's just play this again and try to watch that crash happen, and then see if it actually is an ordering issue. Alright, so it totally is an ordering issue. We can see right here that the AI Soul's interactable awake method ran before the AI character's awake method. So this is kind of interesting because we can have interactables that are not we can have interactables that are not character units. So I want to actually take a look at the AI Soul unit, because if we look at the AI Soul unit, he's just got a direct interactable on him. Okay. this is basically because every character unit has an interactable on them. There are no implementations of interactable. So I've never had interactables basically start up in that order before. So we need to essentially prevent that from happening. Normally this is done through orchestration. With the AI character as the orchestrator. So in this case, basically every AI character pretty much needs to have an interactable on them. But not every interactable needs to have a character on them. So one option is we could actually attempt to move the orchestration to the interactable. But that won't really work because interactables aren't guaranteed to have AI characters. We have the spawnable as the base class of the interactable. And it initializes components, sets up scriptable objects, and creates event subscriptions. Interesting question is, does this need to be done in the awake method? I kind of think that it does. Let's see, actually. We don't initialize any components, at least in the spawnable. We have box collider and interactables in there. I think, let's see, maybe interactables should let their orchestration be handled through the AI character if an AI character exists. Or even if a base character exists. Although that won't specifically work for players. But players themselves don't currently have interactables on them. I don't think. Let me just confirm that. So let's go to the default non-UMA player. No, we do have interactables on us. Okay. So the AI character runs orchestrator start and orchestrator finish on awake. So basically, I think interactable should check, which means actually spawnable should check. Okay. So spawnable I don't think has an orchestrator start method. No, it doesn't. Okay. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go into spawnable. We are going to allow it to initialize its components. At which point it's going to attempt to find a base character. If it finds a base character, then it does not attempt to create event subscriptions. So this can be a protected virtual void orchestrator start. In orchestrator start, we create event subscriptions, which is what triggered that whole error message in the first place. So if get component base character does not equal null, no, if base character is null, if this is a spawnable that's not attached to a character, we are allowed to call our orchestrator start method and create the event subscriptions. Otherwise, our base character will need a reference to our interactable, and it will call its orchestrator start method after everything else, I think. So we'll go down into our base character class. And we're going to grab a protected or create a protected interactable because it looks like we don't keep a reference to that. You know what actually seems maybe even like a better place to put it, actually, in the character unit, because we call the character units basically its startup method anyway. And in fact, the character unit, by definition of being an interactable option, technically already has that reference to the interactable. Perfect. So our character unit will, in its orchestrator startup, no, our interactable option can't. Interactable option can't directly call that, but it does have access to it. So where do we set it? We'll figure out where we set it. It's in get component references. So that means that after character unit has get component references, it has a reference to its interactable. So if character unit gets its component references, if animated unit isn't null, then it calls all that stuff. Then it can initialize its nameplate, at which point it has a nameplate to refer to. And then all this stuff that happened right here, as a result of that stack trace of basically instantiate minimap indicator. Okay, good. So nameplates and minimaps have nothing to do with each other. So, okay. I think this means that basically we're safe to, right here, go if interactable does not equal null, then interactable dot and this is where we need to call its orchestrate startup method, which needs to be public in that case. Okay, I think that will get everything happening in the right order. Now, I think the only thing that I need to do now is actually check not for base character, but for character unit. Because interactable will go on the actual unit, not on the character. Okay. I think that will handle the startup order properly. So this is always a really fun thing when Unity decides to randomly switch startup orders on you, because it reveals weaknesses in your architecture and you get a chance to fix them by making your orchestrator a little more resilient. So we'll try the new game again. We got our lost soul. Ooh, you know what I'm seeing? No crashes. My Guardian of Souls has quests. And I have unborn souls coming down the stairs. Woo! We got it. Perfect. Okay, good. So, basically, now we have confirmed that the changes that we made are working, and we haven't broken, or we broke and fixed anyway, all of the existing cutscene functionality. Next thing we need to do is actually start a cutscene by clicking on an object in a level. So we already have a cutscene interactable. I think we're going to have to make some modifications to that class. So let's look at our cutscene interactable, because basically what this interactable currently does is pretty much loads a level. Right here, load cutscene with delay. And that's not exactly what we want to have happen anymore. We want to be able to basically just straight up play a cutscene. So there's a couple ways that we can deal with this. We could add like a second property to the cutscene interactable, basically. Well, we already have cutscene name. I would have to give it like some other name. And basically, like if one of these things is set, then we're actually just going to load a scene. Otherwise, we can just actually straight up start the cutscene without actually loading a level. The other thing we can do is basically we can just check if the cutscene is set as a return on end, but then we still need a reference to the actual cutscene, not a level. So another thing that we could potentially do is in the cutscene, we could actually put a level name to load, which might seem a little bit weird because our levels actually already have a reference to a cutscene for an autoplay cutscene. So if we go look at load cutscene with delay, and then we go look at this, and then we go look at load cutscene, basically this is a special load level call that saves the character's position. And that's not exactly what we're looking for here. So I think actually it's going to be okay to put in the cutscene auto load level. It's going to seem weird because it'll seem like a circular reference, but they have different basically meanings. Here when we interact with a cutscene, we'll actually tell it to auto load the level from the cutscene, but this load cutscene with delay call won't ever be called from a cutscene that has a level attached to it. So I think that's the way that I'm going to accomplish this. So what we want to do basically is go into the cutscene scriptable object, and this actually seems like the perfect place to put it, right here above the unload scene on end. we can basically add a load scene name. So why don't we make that a private string? Load scene name equals string.empty, and then we'll have to make a reference to it. So this will be a private scene node load scene. Then in our setup scriptable objects method, we will have to initialize that. So we'll go through and we'll initialize it. So if load scene name does not equal null and load scene name does not equal string.empty, then scene node tmp scene node equals system scene node manager dot myInstance dot get resource based on the load scene name, and if the scene node does not equal null, then our load scene equals tmp scene node. Otherwise, we could not find the scene node based on the load scene name. Okay, so what this means is for the cutscene interactable on the cutscene, we now need to go fill in a bunch of scene node names. Or actually, I mean for the cutscene scriptable objects. So this one basically needs to load the Birch Grove cutscene. We don't have an interactable to get us to Crystal Mine, so we don't need a load scene name there. We do have an interactable to get us to the history of magic cutscene, so we'll copy that name and we'll go into the history of magic cutscene and we'll add that as the load scene name. We do have an interactable to get us to the mana seal, so we'll want to put the cutscene name in there. And we do have an interactable. No, we don't have an interactable to get us to the Soul Forge, but we do have an interactable to get us to the War of the Magi, so we'll want to put the War of the Magi cutscene name in the load scene name box there. Now what we can do is in our cutscene interactable, we can perform some logic here, and our cutscene interactable has a cutscene name, but it doesn't have a reference to the cutscene, so we'll actually want to set that up now that this is an actual cutscene. And then if we have a setup scriptable objects call, which we don't, we'll make one. So public override void setup scriptable objects, and then we will need to make a reference to the cutscene. Now scene node already has references to cutscenes, so let's just copy that out of its setup scriptable objects call, go into the cutscene interactable, paste that in here, and cutscene interactable has a cutscene name, which we will rename to cutscene name lowercase, just to be consistent. Still not. And because this is private, it'll be a lowercase c at the beginning as well. Okay. So now, if cutscene name isn't null, cutscene name isn't string.empty, then grab the cutscene and assign the cutscene. Perfect. So now we have a reference to a cutscene rather than a string. So now what we can do is, if our cutscene does not equal null, then we can do a bunch of stuff. If the cutscene dot, and we'll want to actually expose that property that we just made. So load scene, quick actions and refactoring, encapsulate field. Now we can refer to the scene. So if cutscene.myLoadScene does not equal null, then we will load cutscene with delay. No. Actually, just a second. Yes. Otherwise, we're just going to start it directly. And to do that, I think we can just literally call our UI manager.myInstanceBarController.start cutscene to hook into all the existing cutscene functionality. And that means we can just pass in this cutscene. Okay, now what we need to do is, instead of cutscene name, we need to go in a load cutscene with delay and accept the cutscene. So here we can accept the cutscene. Then we need to go into load cutscene delay, which can once again accept the cutscene, sending in the cutscene, and then we have load cutscene. So we can also just pass the cutscene straight on to that. And then in load cutscene, once again, we can accept a cutscene. And here we have the load level, which expects a string. And that's because load level can actually be called from a bunch of different places. So I think here we will pass in the cutscene dot and this is where we want the my load scene. Dot my name. Okay, just a second. We had a my scene name as well, I think. We have a my scene name. think that's just because my scene name is basically exactly the same as resource name, which is also my name. Okay, good. So they're basically exactly the same thing. They're just different aliases pointing to the same property. So that's fine. My name, my scene name, whatever. So just my name is fine. All right, let's save all that and just go back to Unity and just check if there's any issues with that. So what do we have here? And here we're passing in the cutscene directly. Okay. Save that. Go back to Unity, see if it works. Alright, let's just get rid of some of these awake method spams here. Everything seems to have compiled, which is good. So I think the final thing that I have to do is actually go make a cutscene interactable that's capable of loading a cutscene, basically. So let's see what I want to do. There's a couple ways I could actually load this cutscene. One of the ways is I could stick a camera in the scene, attach the AnyRPG cutscene controller singleton to it, and loading the cutscene would basically just load that camera. But then I have to go through like making all the animations manually myself, and not only that, but that would only ever work with like a single camera in the scene. So I want to change the way that that's handled, and basically I want to load a Unity timeline. So let's go make a timeline. To do that, we will go to the Temple of Ancient Energy. We will load it up. Then we need to actually make a timeline. So we'll go to the folder where this Mana Seal cutscene timeline is stored. It's stored in the same folder as the actual scene. So to make ours, we're going to do the same thing basically. We will go into the Temple of Ancient Energy scene folder, and we will create a new Unity timeline. And I'm going to call this the Temple of Ancient Energy. What is this? It's like a bridge or a block movement controller or something like that. I'm just going to call it Temple of Ancient Energy Bridge 1 because we might put more bridges in there. I'm then going to create a new empty game object and reset the transform on it. And I want to add a... I think the way to do this is add a playable director object and ask it... Whoops. And we're going to call this our Bridge 1 timeline controller. I want to pull the Temple of Ancient Energy Bridge 1 over to there, and I don't want to have it play on Awake. Then I want to put a new camera in the scene here, and I want to put the camera like basically right about where my camera is right now. Let me just spin this around, make sure I'm not on the other side of the wall. Okay, good. So I'll have my camera basically looking down, and we'll be able to pretty much view the bridges moving up and down. So this kind of looks like a pretty good spot. You know what? Why not right like here? Yeah, there, that looks good. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'll actually take this main camera here because this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. We will remove the GUI layer from it. I'll take this camera and activate it here and then go game object, align with view. So now the camera is at the same place where my editor camera is, so that's pretty good. Now I want to go basically open up a new timeline window, which I believe is sequencing timeline, and I'm just going to pull it down to the bottom here. I want to click on my Temple of Ancient Energy Bridge 1. I'm going to lock the inspector here, and I'm going to add a new activation track. I think I can just pull the camera. Nope. That is not what I want to do. I can add a new animation track as well. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, right. I can pull the camera over to the activation track. Perfect. So now I want to add a new animation. Okay, so I have the animation track. I also want to pull the camera, over onto the animation track. I think maybe I can pull the camera. No. There we go. Okay, I want to, sorry. Okay, so I want to actually delete that animation track. Actually, I'm just going to delete that activation track too. Okay, let's try this again. Pull down the camera, add an activation track. It's automatically bound to the camera. Pull down the camera, add an animation track, and now our camera has no animator attached to it. Okay. I thought pulling down the camera onto the Unity timeline automatically added the animation track to the camera, but apparently not. So let's just delete that. Maybe I have to add the animator to it first. There we go. Okay, cool. Now I can pull in the main camera. All right, now that's a lot better. Yeah, don't mind me. Still kind of new with the Unity timeline. All right, perfect. So now our main camera has an animator on it. Okay, good. So Now what we want to do is we want to select the main camera, and I thought double clicking on my activation track here would actually open the animation window. And create an animation clip for you. So under A Lost Soul, we have animation clips. I don't think those are the exact ones that I want. We've got a bunch of animations here, but that's also not exactly the ones that I want. Let me just see where I have the other ones stored. I'm just going to save this for a second, and I'm just going to go look at the Maniseal cutscene, because I actually have animations on the Maniseal cutscene, and I just want to see how I organize that. So let's go load up the Maniseal cutscene. And we have this camera here, and it has the animator on it, and we have our timeline controller, and our timeline controller there. Okay. So what is different about this one right here is that we can actually see the camera right there, and we can actually see the animation track right there. I can double click on this animation track and it actually opens the animation window. So I don't know why, okay, now where is this animation track? Right here. I don't know where this one's actually stored on disk. I was hoping maybe if I right clicked it I would get like show folder in Explorer or something like that, but it kind of hides where that's located. Okay, let's go back to the Temple of Ancient Energy. And I want to see if I can figure out, there we go. Okay, now my camera's there. And now I'm recording an animation clip. Alright, that's a little better. So now if I go to the scene view and I grab my main camera, okay, that's cool. All I have to do is just move this thing like a tad and it'll put a keyframe there. Perfect. Now, I don't know if this is in seconds or in frames. It's in frames. Let's put it in seconds. I want to move my timeline marker up to about, actually, you know what? 5 seconds is exactly perfect. Right there, and then just like move the camera again just to give it another keyframe. Okay, perfect. Now we can stop recording, and now if I double click on this, now I have an animation, which I still have no idea where this thing is getting saved to, but that's cool. I got an animation. Also, my camera will be active right up until the end of the cutscene. Perfect. So in my animation, I now need to stick an event to basically tell this thing that my cutscene is ending and it's time to reactivate the main camera. So at frame 60 here, when I deactivate this thing, I'm gonna add an event. Which is not showing me no function selected. That's a little odd. Okay. So normally you can just add in animation events and call them whatever you want. Let me just try deleting that again and hit plus, no function selected. Okay, that's really odd because normally on animations you can do like the standard keyframe, like the standard events for ending the scene. And I have no idea why it's deciding to show me that instead. Okay. That's definitely a little strange. Let's go back to the Mana Seal cutscene and see. I might have done it like a little bit differently. We use the Mana Seal cutscene as a reference here. No, we want, whoops, the Mana Seal cutscene. Okay, now if I look at my timeline controller here, okay, I did it a little bit differently, it looks like. Rather than adding a standard event, I added basically a signal emitter. That emits signal in cutscene and is bound to the AnyRPG cutscene camera controller. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do then is we'll do pretty much like the exact same thing. This is signal emitter here. So we can go back to the Temple of Ancient Energy here. We go to the main camera. We don't need the flare layer. We can add the component AnyRPG Cutscene Camera Controller. We can go back to the timeline, zoom in a little bit here, double click on the animation, remove that from the animation, then over here at the 5-second mark, right click, and I think this is where I want add signal emitter. I want to emit the signal end cutscene, and then I want to add a signal receiver to the main camera and call AnyRPG cutscene camera controller dead end cutscene. Okay, there we go. think that'll work. We should basically end up with a main camera that gets deactivated at the end of the cutscene and pretty much just stays in place for 5 seconds. Let's save all that stuff. And now when we activate our cutscene, we need a way to actually tell our playable director to play. Now this is an interesting issue because basically we don't have a reference to our playable director. And this playable director exists only in the scene. There's a couple different ways that we could handle this basically. One of them being we could put like a tag on this, and we could put like a playable director tag or something, and then we could do like a find objects by tag. But that wouldn't be like, I mean, it's one way of doing it, but I don't like having a really messy long tag list with all sorts of weird tags on them. So I think another way that we can basically take care of this is we can have like a playable director controller which has a reference to its local playable director and can call the play method on it. And then I pretty much want to add a new component to the game manager that actually accepts registrations from playable director controllers in the scene. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Basically this thing will pretty much just hold a dictionary to all the playable directors that have registered themselves in the scene, which can allow us to have like multiple cutscenes, because what I want is to actually have like a bunch of clickable things in the dungeon you can click on and then have them play different playable directors. And so building this system may seem like a little bit of overkill, but it's going to allow us a lot of flexibility in making a bunch of different cutscenes without having to like scan through tags and stuff each time. So to do that, we'll go into the engine, we'll go into scripts, we will go in a game manager, and we're going to add a playable director manager and a playable director controller. And I'm just going to basically duplicate the system game manager because it's pretty much got almost everything that I need in it. So we were going to call this one the system playable director manager. And we'll open that up, change the name here to system playable director manager. We will open the singleton and change that system playable director manager, close the singleton, and this thing basically needs just a dictionary pretty much. We don't even really need any serialized fields on it. So this is a private dictionary, and let's see how I want to do this here. We can either have it as a dictionary of like string playable director controller or timeline playable director controller. In that case, I think let's just do string for now. So private dictionary of string playable director controller, which is a class we haven't created yet, equals new dictionary of string playable director controller. And then we can get rid of all those other properties and I don't think we need like anything in the start method here. This thing does not create subscriptions of any sort. I'm just going to comment out all that stuff because actually this is common functionality that we use a lot of the time, so I'll just keep those shells in there. And then basically we're just going to expose this dictionary and we're going to give it a name, and it's going to be the playable director dictionary, for lack of a better term. And we're going to do quick actions and refactoring and just encapsulate that field, unfold the singleton because it got stuck inside that singleton region. And just change the name there. Okay, now we can fold up the singleton and actually make the playable director controller. So let's just save that. And then I'm just going to duplicate the file again and rename it playable director controller. We've got some errors here. Yeah, that's fine. Those are the errors I have to fix. So Control D to duplicate. And now we can call this one the playable director controller. And this is not the one that opened. There, playable director controller. So this is a class playable director controller. We're going to delete the singleton from it because we can have as many of these in the scene as we want. They don't need a dictionary. Basically, the only thing that they need is their playable director. So playable director, and I think if I right click on this using Unity Engine .playables, there we go. Okay, so playable director equals null. In our awake method, we'll make a reference to it. So playable director equals get component playable director. And if the playable director does not equal null, then we want to register ourselves with the system playable director manager .myInstance .my playable director dictionary, and we pretty much want to set whatever we set that to the playable director. And let's see here. We have our playable director dot, and then here's where I want to get, I think it's just called the playable is the property I'm looking for. Playable asset. I think that's what it is. And a playable asset dot name. Okay. that's good. Basically, that should give us a string with the timeline name pretty much. So then right, this is the controller. We also need an on disable method. Because we'll need to unregister ourselves from the dictionary. And here, we actually don't even really technically need to assign the playable director controller. We can actually just assign a playable director. So using Unity Engine .playables, and our dictionary will just be a dictionary of string playable director. And we're just going to put the key is the timeline name as a string. So essentially this will tell us if I want to play whatever timeline is in the string here, then I can just basically call the playable director's play method. The playable director controller will be responsible for registering and unregistering ourselves from this. Okay, so here we just want to make a check, and we want to say if actually, honestly, we don't even need to check there, but we will need to check on disable. So what we want to do is if our system playable director dot okay, here, since we're looking up based on the string, the playable, no, you know what? We actually do need to register the playable director controller. Actually, we don't, because we're just removing based on the key. Okay, so basically here, if system playable director manager.myplayable director dictionary.contains key, and the key is the playable director.playable asset.name. Then we basically just want to run the remove method on that key. All right, I think that'll work. Now the playable director controller that's attached to the playable director will add it to the dictionary, and now we can communicate with the system playable director manager and ask it to play an timeline for us by interacting with some object in the scene. So we need to stick the system playable director manager on the game manager. And just make sure there's no errors in the code here. All right. So we will go to the Bridge 1 timeline controller, which has the playable director. We will add the playable director controller to that. We will save that, and now we want to go to the game manager So we'll load up the game manager. And let's see where's the best place to put this. I think it's actually fine just to have it here, right at the base level of the game manager. So we're going to add the system playable director manager. Then we're going to apply that as an override. Whoops, no. Shoot. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay, we're going to remove that component. We're going to revert that. No, we're going to remove the component. Okay, you know what? I'm going to Control Z. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to add a component. We're going to apply that to the game manager. There we go. That's better. Now it's not an override anymore. Much better. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want a way to tell our cutscene it needs to play the timeline. So we need to give a new field to our cutscene, and it's a string with a timeline name. So let's go find our cutscene class. Add a new serialized field, and this is a private string timeline name equals string dot empty. And this is the timeline to play with the cutscene. Then the next thing we need to do is actually add the timeline name to a cutscene. So let's save that and go find a cutscene and add a timeline name to it. So the timeline that we're using is the, and I don't have that here, so I have to go find it in the scene folder under a lost soul, under Temple of Ancient Energy. Okay, this is the name of the timeline right here, Temple of Ancient Energy Bridge 1. And we need to actually add that to the cutscene. And we need to create a new cutscene for that. So create new AnyRPG cutscene. And I'm just going to call this the Ancient Temple Bridge 1. We'll call this the Ancient Temple Bridge 1. It doesn't load any scenes. It doesn't unload on ends. We don't really care about nameplates. We don't care about viewed or faction colors. There is no dialogue, but there's a timeline name with it. So we will save that. And now we should have a way to actually refer to the thing in the dictionary. Now, just to make sure, when we actually add this, I'm going to do a debug because I'm not entirely sure that the name of the file is going to match the name of that string. And if it doesn't, we can deal with it in other ways, but that should be good for now, and let us know whether that's going to work. Okay, and finally, we actually need a cutscene interactable in the scene that's capable of playing the cutscene, and then we want to attach it to the button. So let's let this compile, and then we'll go do that stuff. So the cutscene's called Ancient Temple Bridge 1. So we will go to the Temple of Ancient Energy. We'll load up the level here. We will basically disable this main camera because we don't want this to actually be active until the cutscene is active. Then I'm going to create a new empty, reset the transform on it, and call it the... You know what I'm just thinking here? I can always just basically put all these components on the Bridge 1 timeline controller. Honestly, I don't think there would be anything wrong with that. Let's add an interactable. Don't let it glow on mouse over. And it is not really interactable. It's just there so that we can add a cutscene interactable, which we can remotely control. The cutscene name is Ancient Temple Bridge 1. Which is correct. Perfect. Now the last thing we need to do is connect that to the switch. So when we walk into the dungeon, we've got this switch right here. No, right there. There we go. And it's called Control Switch Sun Symbol. The Control Switch Sun Symbol controls two objects currently. We need to make it control a third, and we're going to pull over the Control Switch Sun Symbol. No. Sorry. We are going to pull over the Bridge 1 timeline controller. Alright, the Bridge 1 timeline controller. Let's pull this out. Has the cutscene interactable. Perfect. And when we do interact, there are no prerequisites for that, so it should basically just launch the thing right away. Now if we go over to the cutscene interactable here, it's basically just going to tell the My Cutscene bar controller to start the cutscene immediately. I'm just thinking, is there anything else we actually need it to do? I don't know. I think it's time to try that out, actually. Because honestly, I think we have everything we need for that to theoretically work. So let's go back to the load game manager. I think I might be missing one or two things, but let's test that. And at least if there are any issues, we'll discover them now. Oh, wait, right. When I loaded the cutscene, I forgot to contact the system playable director manager and tell it to play based on the cutscene name. So what we want to do is go system playable director manager dot my instance dot, and then we want to grab the my playable director dictionary with the scene based on I think we should probably just check first. So if cut scene dot did I expose that? Timeline name, didn't expose it. Okay. We're going to encapsulate that field, timeline name, so that we can access it. And if cutscene.myTimelineName does not equal null and cutscene.myTimelineName does not equal string.empty, and systemplayablemanager.myInstance.myPlayableDictionary.containsKey, based on the cutscene name, then we are going to pass in that as the key, which will return the playable director, at which point we can finally call the play method and now it should actually play the cutscene while our cutscene bar controller does its thing. Okay, so we're going to load up our tester. Our tester's here in the Temple of Ancient Energy. We're going to click. Okay. That, like, totally almost worked. The fact that I got this "there are 2 audio listeners in the scene" message means that I didn't deactivate my main camera. That was, like, the only thing missing. So to be honest, I think I actually need to do this first. And if we go into Start Cutscene and go to the definition and just make sure, you know what this thing's not doing? It's not actually deactivating the main camera. So let's find all references and just see where that thing is called from. Because basically, yeah, that right there. So we pretty much just need to make sure that that's set to false. And essentially, we can pretty much also just perform a check to see if, I think the property is called active self. And if active self is true, then deactivate. Yeah, okay. That should deactivate the main camera and allow us to actually view the cutscene. And then when the playable director automatically activates the cutscene camera, it should automatically just switch over, and hopefully without a whole pile of warnings. Let's save that and press play and try that one more time. We know it actually worked because we actually heard the things, like, we heard them moving, which was cool, because of the fact that there was 2 audio listeners, which was kind of neat. So let's try that again. Oh, yes! Oh my goodness! 3 hours for all that? But holy cow, that was amazing. That was like the absolute most awesome 3 second cutscene I have ever done in my life. I am so proud of that. We had to do so much coding to get there, but booyah. Now we can add all sorts of like little cool cutscenes whenever we press buttons just to like zoom in and let us see something happening. Rad. I am so happy with that. I hope you are too. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a bit of a long episode. I always knew it was going to be because this was a lot of really cool programming to actually get all this functionality in place. So, as always, if you did enjoy that, please don't forget to thumbs up the video, subscribe to the AnyRPG YouTube channel, or just leave a note in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.